Welcome back to our series on all the rules in Riftbound to help you become an effective judge. This is our fourth video in the series, and we're going to go over starting the game, ending the game, and the modes of play. To start a game of Riftbound, each player puts their champion legend and their chosen champion into their respective legend and champion zones. Players then select their battlefields and put them in the battlefield zone, and we'll go over this in detail later because exactly how this works depends upon which way you're playing the game. Each player then shuffles their main deck and rune deck and places them in their respective main deck and rune deck zones. After all this is done, then we determine the turn order using a random and fair method all players agree to. And then finally, players draw their starting hand of 4 cards and take mulligans. The mulligan process in Riftbound consists of 3 steps. First, players can set aside up to 2 cards from their opening hand. Second, they'll draw the same number of cards that they set aside. And third, they recycle the set aside cards. Don't forget that if you're recycling 2 cards to the main deck at the same time, you need to randomize them. Once all players have completed mulligans, the game is ready to begin. Now let's talk about ending the game. Generally, the game is going to end when one player scores the final point. Earning the final point comes with some extra conditions. A player needs to earn the final point in one of 3 ways. A player can earn their final point through a card effect, such as Yasuo Windrider, who scores 1 point when he's moved 3 times in the same turn. They can score the final point by holding a battlefield at the start of their turn, or they can score the final point by scoring all of the battlefields in a turn through any combination of holding at the start of the turn and conquering during the turn. If a player scores a battlefield but they can't earn the final point because they have not yet scored all of the battlefields in a turn, they draw a card instead of gaining a point. This will still count as conquering for the purposes of any cards that trigger when your player conquers. The game can also end for individual players. Players may concede the game at any time. If after a player concedes there's only one remaining player in the game, that player wins. Otherwise, we follow this process to remove the conceding player from the game. First, we banish all permanents and runes that they control. Next, if their battlefield is being used in this game, we replace their battlefield with a token battlefield that has no abilities. Then we remove all the cards they own from the game, and we counter all spells and abilities they control in the chain. Then we can proceed with the rest of the game. If the conceding player was the player whose turn it was, or the player who had focus, or the player who had priority, we advance to the next player in order. Removing the player from the game may create a situation where all players have passed focus or priority, and we're going to proceed accordingly in terms of resolving the chain or concluding combat. We'll cover focus and priority in a later video in extensive detail. Next, let's talk about modes of play, informally known as formats. The first mode of play many players experience is a duel, which is a best of 1 versus 1 format. It takes 8 points to win a duel, and players will randomly select one of their 3 battlefields for the game during the start of the turn process. In a duel, the player who is going second channels an extra rune on their first turn. Our next mode of play is a match, which is a best of 3 1 versus 1 format. Like a duel, it takes 8 points to win. Instead of choosing randomly, players will select one battlefield they have not used during the match at the start of each game. The player that's going second channels an extra rune on their first turn. In all games after the first in the match, the player who lost the previous game will get to choose who plays first at the start of each game. Now let's move into the multiplayer formats, starting with Skirmish. Skirmish is a best of 1, 3-player free-for-all format. Like a duel, the 1 versus 1 best of 1 format, it takes 8 points to win, players randomly select one of their 3 battlefields, and this time the player who goes last is the one that channels an extra rune on their turn. And the player who goes first does not draw a card on their first turn. In a skirmish, turn order goes clockwise from the first player. Our next multiplayer format is War, which is a best of 1 4-player free-for-all that also takes 8 points to win. Players are again going to randomly select one of their 3 battlefields for the game. However, once we decide the turn order, the player going first will put their battlefield away so that there are only 3 battlefields in play. The player going last again channels an extra rune on their first turn, and the player going first again does not draw a card on their first turn. And just like with a skirmish, turn order proceeds clockwise around the table. Now it's time for perhaps the most exciting format, Magma Chamber, which is a best of 1 2 versus 2 team format. In this mode of play, it takes 11 points to win. Much like War, the 4-player free-for-all format, players will randomly select one of their 3 battlefields, and when we decide the turn order, the player that's going first will put their battlefield away. the player going last will channel an extra rune on their first turn, and the player going first will also skip drawing a card on their first turn. Turn order depends on how players are seated. When teammates are sat across from each other at the table, turn order goes in the normal clockwise direction. However, if players are seated beside their teammate, which is how they should be arranged in a tournament environment, play order is passed across the table and then back to their teammate, and then back across the table and back to the first player. Magma Chamber also includes several other rules regarding team play. Teams win and lose together, so if a player wins, the entire team wins, and if a player concedes or loses, the entire team loses. Players cannot score a battlefield that their teammate controlled at the start of their turn. And speaking of scoring, the normal final point restriction to score every battlefield does not include those battlefields that were controlled by a player's teammate at the start of their turn. Teammates have to use different legends and different battlefields from each other. Players can never move units to a battlefield that's occupied by a teammate. Players cannot hide cards at a battlefield controlled by their teammate. Players may play spells and abilities during their teammate's turn. A teammate's game objects are considered friendly game objects. However, control is not shared. A player cannot elect a standard move using their teammate's units. And that covers all the rules we need to start a game and end a game, no matter which format you're playing. Thank you for watching, and good luck in your studies to become a Riftbound judge. I'll look forward to seeing you at the next video. In the meantime, like, comment, share, and subscribe for more Riftbound judge content.